welcome back to this series of videos on authoritarianism. So the last video we talked quite a bit about George Orwell, and the point I want to make in summary about what Orwell understood and what Orwell was trying to warn us about is that Orwell understood that all authoritarianism was collectivist. And there he was, as an international socialist. He was advocating for a collectivist philosophy. But he understood that the danger comes in the imposition of the philosophy in a way that ignored the experiences of the people on the receiving end. And in 1940, long before he wrote, like 1984, he was warning about the moral superiority felt by the people who agreed with him about socialism, the moral superiority of the left. And he said only people who thought themselves so enlightened as my fellow socialists could fail to understand basic human instincts. Well, that, my friends, is exactly what happened in the election between Clinton and Trump, when Clinton called all those Trump supporters deplorable. They couldn't understand, she couldn't understand the honest instincts. They're not racist, they weren't sexist, they weren't fascist, they weren't transphobic or whatever else it is. They weren't those things. Patriotism isn't those things. You know, wanting to have borders isn't those things. You can argue with whether it's good or bad, but it's not that. It's exactly what Trump was identifying in the left. Trump, oh my goodness. What Orwell was identifying on the left in 1940, and here we are in 2017. I tell you what, if Hillary Clinton had the international socialist George Orwell on her campaign team, he would have told her, you don't say that, but more importantly, don't think like that, because then you will be one of the collectivist authoritarians that I wrote 1984 An Animal Farm about. There's a thought. Now, there is a conceit and a deceit in authoritarianism that you mustn't forget. Well, we've already talked about one of those, right? Which is that a lot of the left-wing authoritarians will deny their humanity in accusing you of denying their own humanity. But here's another one. The conceit and the deceit of all authoritarian political arguments is this: that an argument for X is an argument for coercing people to do X. And it is not. It never is. An argument that X is a good idea is a long, long way from an argument that people should be forced to do X. Because the argument that people should be forced to do X, which authoritarians don't make explicit, but underlies all of their political arguments, that kind of an argument would actually mean not only should you do X, but if you do not, that I should, or we as a society through our institutions, should harm you. We should punish you. Now, the only way you can judge whether it is appropriate to force people to do things is to make an unprejudiced evaluation of whether the harm done to you by the punishment is better than whatever harm you would be doing, or by, doing X or not doing X, right? So, for example, if, as in New York, I am going to fine you, and if you don't pay your fine, put you in prison, or let's say, close down your company and therefore wreck your livelihood, right? If I'm going to do that, what I have to be able to show is that that harm done to you is not as bad as the harm you do when you call somebody she who wants to be called G. When you put it like that, it's insane, right? But that is where we are going if we follow the authoritarian left. In this respect, Jordan Peterson, the professor from Ontario, has become something of an internet sensation because he was facing losing his job because he, and you should check him out, I obviously can't speak for him, but he wasn't prepared to lie, as he saw it, to be coerced into speech that he did not believe was true. There are some words that we don't use for good reason. I mean, you could even argue if there's good reason. I'm thinking of the N word, but you know, we understand why we don't use those words because we don't want to cause offense. But it's a whole different thing when we are using the institutions of society and the enforcement mechanisms of law to force people to say things at the request of other people. Words that don't exist, haven't arisen naturally in our language. Right? So therefore, words that we wouldn't naturally use unless we were being compelled to use them. There's a whole different thing between not using offensive words and being made to speak things and to be harmed through fine or imprisonment in our property or our person for lack of compliance. Now, I'm not saying we should or should not say these words. I am saying we should not be harming people in their property or persons for not speaking words that to them are not true to them. I find that very hard to argue with. George Orwell came up with the idea of newspeak. Yeah? And if you don't know what that is, look it up. Newspeak. It's the speech that you are compelled to say to advance a political agenda and to advance a political agenda of necessarily an authoritarian regime. We have that now in North America. That would have terrified George Orwell more, I believe, than Donald Trump. Not least because it is coming from those same morally superior people who are so enlightened, to use George Orwell's phrase, right, from his essay in 1940, My Country, Right or Left. It's coming from people who are so enlightened that they don't even have to try and understand what their political opponents feel or think, because they already know that they're either bad or stupid. They're the very people that George Orwell, in the end, realized were the most likely tyrants, and he wrote 2 great novels about them.